Hey everybody, Trey here. Welcome back to another video. Wanted to do a little bit of an update video on today's severe weather threat for Monday, November 4th. This is going to be the final day of note in this severe weather outbreak sequence we've seen over the past few days. There have been some changes over the past day since our previous video, so I wanted to come back and give you all an update and take a look at some of the data that we have seen this morning. The biggest changes have come in the form of a westward shift in the enhanced risk area, level 3 out of 5 enhanced risk in the orange shaded region here for today. And that has again been shifted quite far back to the west, now including the Oklahoma City metro area, as well as Tulsa down toward Lawton and Fort Sill. So yesterday, if you recall, the enhanced risk was really over here in eastern Oklahoma, western Arkansas, into northeast Texas. Now that has been shifted quite a bit back toward the west, here to include parts of southwest and central Oklahoma. Also does go down to the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex right on the edge of that enhanced risk. So I would treat this as if you are in the enhanced risk fully if you live anywhere in the DFW Metroplex today as well. Also a northeastward shift in the enhanced risk up into southwest Missouri, including Springfield. So that was not the case yesterday, but trends have supported a northeastward shift of that enhanced risk area. Level 2 out of 5 slight risk extends all the way up to the Illinois-Missouri border and down into central Texas, Waco, and Austin, over toward Lufkin in that slight risk, level 2 out of 5, with a marginal risk surrounding that. All hazards in play for today, including the threat for tornadoes, perhaps some strong, as you can see here in the yellow stippled region that coincides with the enhanced risk area. 10% hashed area for tornadoes, including some strong tornado threat in the yellow stippled region there, with a 2 and 5% risk extending outward from that. So the tornado threat is certainly elevated for today, and the threat for strong tornadoes is on the table. Damaging winds also going to be a threat in the red shaded region, most notably, with that yellow shaded region next to next highest level there for some damaging winds and some large hail. Don't expect large hail to be too much of a threat today, but some more isolated convection could tend to produce some larger hailstones, but nothing really on the significant side. Really, the greatest threats today are going to be the tornado and damaging wind risks. Want to keep this short and sweet today, as the severe threat is expected to ramp up fairly early in the day here. I'm recording this about 9:30 a.m. Central Standard Time, and we should be able to should be seeing some uptick in severe and storm intensity by about midday or so at the latest. So I want to get this video out here. Going to try to keep this a little bit on the brief side for today. We'll show you what's going on right now. We've had multiple bands of storms overnight traversing parts of Oklahoma, with some tornado warnings included in that. Those are starting to wane in intensity, and we are starting to see a little bit of clearing here across central Oklahoma, and that is going to make way for some additional activity over the next couple of hours. Also, some storms out here across Missouri and Arkansas. Those will continue to move off to the northeast. I suspect they're mostly on the elevated side, and our main severe threat going to come later on in the morning. Here is our current radar imagery here. You see those bands of storms, kind of just a broken, disorganized band at this point. Nothing really robust within this complex, but we should see, again, storm intensity start to ramp up within these bands here, and perhaps additional development out ahead in any confluence bands out in the open warm sector by midday or so. Here is our mesoscale discussion that is out currently. This was issued about an hour ago as I'm recording this, just after 8:30 a.m. Central Standard Time. We do have this mesoscale discussion that is out, and that is for the red outlined region here. So that includes OKC down toward Lawton, over to Ardmore, Durant, up toward McAllister, Tulsa, all included in, and that is really going to be our first round of daytime storms with this Monday event here. They noted the uncertainty here, and they are unsure whether or not the activity will start to increase in intensity and organization, by this point, 9 to 10 a.m. or so, or whether or not it's going to wait to closer to midday when the main ascent starts to overspread the region. Looks like at this point we are holding off somewhat across this area with as far as organization and intensity goes, but we're going to have to watch that closely as we go toward the midday time frame. Some mesoanalysis data here. This is our 500 millibar map, and here is our trough. It's really starting to eject into the southern plains. Most of that strong flow that was on the backside of the trough yesterday has translated now to the base of the trough, and will continue to move into the exit region of the trough as we go forward into today. So this is a mature trough, really peaking in intensity at this point, and it's going to continue to move off to the east today. and starting to overspread the region with very strong flow aloft over the next couple of hours, going to really increase that deep layer shear and increase the forcing for ascent for robust thunderstorm development across a wide region of the southern plains. Down at 850 millibars here, very strong low-level jet in place, and that is going to persist today as we have a stronger surface low development out here across the southern plains. We're going to see low-level cyclone development here. That will allow this low-level jet to persist through the day, 40 to 50 plus knots of flow out across Oklahoma down to the south and east over that Arklatex region as well. And so again, that is going to lead to very strong low-level shear and strong low-level warm moist advection persisting throughout the day. At the surface, we see a little bit of perhaps a low out here in New Mexico. Not going to be much of an impact today, but we see this little weak circulation at this point. This is going to tighten today and start to move off to the east, and that will provide a little bit of extra oomph there for a severe threat. You can see the wind shift here. Here's our warm frontal zone, dry line / cold front somewhere in there. And again, those features will continue to move off to the east today. Warm front will lift off to the north as well, allowing places like southwest Missouri to get in on that warm sector and to get in on the severe storm action for today. Some raw surface data for you here. You can see exactly where those boundaries are. Northerly flow across the Texas Panhandle and western Oklahoma, southerly flow off to the east. So our boundary is somewhere in this vicinity here, and that puts it basically right over the Oklahoma City area here. So OKC right on the edge of this severe weather threat for today. Storms may start to fire right in here, but they'll quickly move off to the east. So I suspect most of the severe threat is going to persist off to the east of Oklahoma City, but still the OKC Metroplex needs to be on alert going through the next couple of hours, closer to storm initiation before storms move off to the east and the severe threat transitions into eastern Oklahoma. Very moist air mass over eastern Oklahoma as well. Dew points in the mid to upper 60s and 70s down toward the Arklatex region into western Arkansas. So a very moist air mass in place. Lots of juice for storms to work with once they start to increase in intensity by late morning to about midday. Here is our morning sounding at Norman, Oklahoma. And you can see a lot of elevated instability here. This was at 6 a.m. Central Standard Time. Lots of instability already in place in an elevated capacity above this little cool stable layer near the surface or in the low levels. But that will quickly, if we put this sounding off to the east where we haven't seen as much action this morning that has cooled those surface temperatures, once we see that warm front start to lift off to the north and temperatures start to warm through a little bit of broken heating, this little bit of an inversion will be non-existent, and we don't have that much inhibition at this point at Oklahoma City, minus 65 convective inhibition. You translate that out to the east where temperatures are already in the 70s and dew points are in the mid to upper 60s. This inversion is probably almost non-existent out here across eastern Oklahoma into the Arklatex region. So that is going to allow for very rapid storm development by late morning, and it's not going to take much to get those storms to fire. Once again, the forcing is going to start to overspread the region within the next couple of hours, and that will allow for storm initiation, widespread storm initiation. And that is one thing that may lead to a little bit more of a messy storm mode for today. Very limited capping, allowing for a lot of storms to fire on the aforementioned boundaries, our main dry line / cold front, and any confluence bands we see out in the open warm sector. Tough to see any at this point, maybe one right in here. Gonna have to watch those confluence bands closely, as those may lead to a little bit more subtle forcing for more discrete development out in the open warm sector. Here is your warm front, by the way, as well. So all these boundaries going to support storm development, and again, not going to take much with such little capping in play at this point, and a lot of forcing starting to overspread the region with such a potent mid and upper level trough. So that is what is going on thermodynamically here. Kinematically, already a very robust environment in place. Lots of low-level curvature here. This is a little bit off to the north of the warm front. You can see the easterly winds at the surface at the time that this sounding was released. Again, 6 a.m. Central Standard Time. But still plenty of curvature there in the low levels of the photographs. Lots of low-level shear and ample deep layer shear. Over 65 knots of effective bulk shear here this morning. So a very strongly sheared environment, very favorable for organized severe storms. All right, moving off to some model data here. This is the 12Z NAM at 500 millibars. So here is that trough making its way into the southern U.S. Again, you'll see how that flow transitions to mostly on the eastern side of the trough axis here. A little bit of a positively tilted trough here. Very strong winds aloft, providing really strong deep layer shear here, and lots of forcing. The forcing, as we've talked about in the last couple of videos for this event, is the winds aloft are more meridional, very much paralleling the aforementioned boundaries, especially the cold front / dry line here. And if we go to our surface data here real quick, we'll come back to this in a second, but I'll zoom into our southern plains sector here, but this is going to be our boundary, something like that. And our shear vectors, yesterday's model run showed a little bit more perpendicularity with respect to the initiating boundary. This particular run by this afternoon looks to be a little bit more on the parallel side, so that those shear vectors a little bit more parallel to the initiating boundary, leading to more of a linearly organized storm mode along that boundary. We might see a short window for discrete development again, but again, I think a lot of updrafts are going to go up on these boundaries, particularly the cold front / dry line. So I think we're going to get a fairly quick transition to more of a clustered, messy, linear mode along that boundary there. Any confluence bands out in the open warm sector, again, much more subtle forcing there, so that could provide a little bit better chance for more semi-discrete development with the risk for all hazards there. But back to 500 millibars here again, very strong trough making its way into the region and going into the overnight hours tonight. Takes on a little bit more of a negative tilt, really strengthening that flow in the exit region of the trough. So we should see that severe threat persist into the overnight hours tonight before things move off to the east pretty rapidly. Down at 850 millibars, see that low-level jet persist throughout the day. 40 to 50 knots here this morning. That continues through the afternoon. We don't really see a robust decrease in that low-level jet all day, so that's going to, again, keep that low-level shear very, very strong with surface winds out of the southeast and low-level flow here at about a kilometer off the surface out of the south. So lots of low-level shear in place, lots of strengthening and veering of those winds with height going into the afternoon, and then we'll see, as usual, a nocturnal ramp-up in the low-level jet, perhaps allowing that tornado threat to persist. Given that strengthening of the low-level shear after dark. Down at the surface here, I'll zoom into our southern plains sector. So again, a little bit more of a nebulous pattern at the moment, but we will see surface low development and a little bit of a tightening of those isobars there by mid-afternoon or so. This is a little bit weaker than what we saw with the last few model runs here. I want to take it back to yesterday's model run. We saw a little bit better defined surface low, a little bit farther off to the west a couple days ago. It was a little bit broader, but still a little bit different here. This is a little bit more of a strung out solution here, but still somewhat of a tighter surface low than what we have seen so far with this particular setup. That will allow those winds at the surface to nicely back and strengthen there ahead of that in eastern Oklahoma, all the way up into southwest Missouri, western Arkansas, down into the Arklatex region. So we should have a broad warm sector in place. Here is our moisture, and very broad warm sector indeed here by midday. This is noon Central Standard Time. Very broad warm sector, stretching all the way from basically central Oklahoma eastward toward the Mississippi River up here on the northern side of the warm sector. So a lot of real estate able to be impacted by severe storms today. And again, it's going to hug these boundaries, but any confluence bands in the open warm sector going to have to be watched closely for more discrete development. But plenty of moisture here, dew points in the 60s and low 70s, really rapidly transporting northward on the strong low-level southerly flow. By 18Z, let's go ahead and see what we're dealing with here. This is just east of the OKC metro area, between OKC and McAllister, basically. And this is a very robust-looking profile. Lots of instability here on the NAM, upwards of 2,000 joules per kilogram. Mixed layer CAPE, 76 over 69 at the surface. Very deep moisture, and that could be a little bit of a concern. We've seen, there has been some research out there recently that has shown that really, really deep moist layers perhaps tend to increase the ability for storms to produce downdrafts, and that allows for those downdrafts to congeal and foster more of a messy linear mode. We saw this, I think this was one of the main issues going back to last week's severe threat on, I believe, was it Wednesday, when we had that enhanced risk across parts of Oklahoma and it ended up being just a pretty linear storm mode right from the get-go, and the tornado threat really was not able to materialize. Here, kind of the same thing, very deep moist layer, and this was, hint, an issue on May 6th, on the May 6th high risk as well from this past year. We'll go into that in our breakdown video here in a few weeks' time. But very deep moist layer, and that has been, again, perhaps that could be a cause for a little bit stronger downdrafts with storms, and therefore another factor that may indicate more of a linear mode. But still, plenty of moisture here in the low levels and plenty of instability aloft. Steeper lapse rates aloft here, plenty of instability for robust updrafts. In this kind of environment with very strong low-level shear, upwards of 200 meters squared per second squared effective storm relative helicity, deep layer shear in excess of 40 to 50 knots or so, certainly favorable for all severe hazards, including tornadoes. Moving on to about 21Z, again, a lot of convection ongoing here, so hopefully we'll be able to pick an uncontaminated sounding. This is closer to the McAllister over toward Fort Smith areas here, and by 21Z, so 3 p.m. Central Standard Time, we have an environment certainly favorable for significant tornadoes. Very strong instability, 2,000 joules per kilogram, 2,100 joules per kilogram mixed layer CAPE, 79 over 70 at the surface, deep moisture, steep lapse rates aloft, but very strong low and deep layer shear. Our SRH, effective storm relative helicity, in excess of 400 meters squared per second now. Very strong curvature in the low levels of the hodograph, and very strong deep layer shear as well. One thing to note here, we have very strong storm relative inflow. That is basically from our storm motion vector to the low levels of the hodograph. Just eyeballing it, looks like about 10, 20, 30 plus knots of storm relative inflow, which is quite on the high side. What does that mean? Well, that means we're going to need a lot of storm interactions to allow to aid in tornado genesis in some of these storms. So any more discrete supercells, if you see more embedded supercells and they have a lot of stuff sort of on their flanks down here, that may be a sign that may help aid in tornado genesis in that lead supercell, because we're going to need a little bit of outflow from the sort of nudging or feeding storms, if you will, to balance out the strong storm relative inflow in the main supercell. So that is something to note today. This is a very southeast Dixie Alley type event today, where you have strong storm relative inflow. That means you're going to have a fairly messy type storm mode perhaps, but that may also help aid in tornado genesis in any slightly more discrete supercells or embedded supercells within a line, as you're going to need that outflow from those feeding storms to balance out the strong storm relative inflow in the lead supercell. So something to keep in mind today. For chasers, it might mean a little bit more of a difficult storm chase today, given a more messy storm mode and more feeder cells needed to induce tornado genesis. But we could see, if tornado genesis is induced, obviously this profile certainly favors strong tornadoes with ample instability and strong low-level shear. Going toward 0Z here, we start to see stuff move off to the east over toward western Arkansas, the Arklatex region. So we'll take a sounding out there, Oklahoma-Arkansas border. Much of the same instability, a little bit sapped at this point. Could be multiple rounds of convection traversing the warm sector, or could just be a NAM quirk here, but still enough instability with, assuming robust storms are already ongoing, we still have strong low-level and deep layer shear to support that significant tornado and damaging wind risk there. And then going into the overnight hours tonight, we start to see the warm sector get pinched off with northward extent. And going into tomorrow, not much of a warm sector left. We may see an isolated severe storm or two down in here across the Gulf Coast states, but nothing really of note here. The severe threat should wane very rapidly, really after midnight here, as that warm sector gets pinched off going into Tuesday morning. Couple of quick convection allowing models here. This is our latest HRRR run. You see that convection that is being progged, how it's been initialized here on the HRRR. Lots of convection there off to the north. Not a terrible look here, not a terrible initialization. You see quite a bit of convection here in these areas, so a decent initialization here from the recent HRRR. And then you see by about midday or so, we start to see an uptick in coverage and intensity of these storms with multiple little semi-discrete supercells in several different bands here. You see our main band here back across northeast into central Oklahoma, north Texas, and then some confluence band activity out in here perhaps will have to be watched closely. So lots of rounds of storms here, and then things kind of get messy. You see just not really, you still see some semi-discrete updrafts in here, but they are very much sort of clustered here, so it's going to be tough chasing out there if you are chasing in this area today. But we see multiple bands here once again of storms out here across these areas, and those will move off to the east going into the afternoon. And then things will eventually sort of congeal into a line by early evening, all the way down into central Texas there. We could see that tornado and damaging wind risk extend all the way down into the central Texas area, Austin, Waco, off to the east going into the overnight hours. Kind of a squall line moves off to the east by the early morning Tuesday, and then again the severe threat will wane going into Tuesday morning. WRF ARW model here has not quite as much convection at this point as we have seen so far, so something to note here with this particular model run, but still it has quite a bit. We see that storm coverage increase pretty far to the southwest, actually, southwest of the OKC Metroplex by 19Z, so this is going to be 1 p.m. Central Daylight Time, or Central Standard Time, with some beans out here in the open warm sector to pay attention to. Storms move off to the east. You see some preceding warm sector convection there with more discrete supercells ahead of the main line. Those will have to be watched most closely for a significant tornado and damaging wind risk, and maybe an isolated large hail threat as well. But this is a pretty scary solution here from the WRF ARW model. This is a solution where we have the main band of storms and then multiple discrete to semi-discrete supercells out in the open warm sector in eastern Oklahoma to western Arkansas, southwest Missouri there for the entire afternoon. Again, that'll have the greatest threat for significant tornadoes there before things kind of congeal into more of a solid line in the evening hours tonight. NSSL WRF model. Not a bad initialization here. Then we have mostly a band of storms here, beans out in the open warm sector, very much on the same page with the other models. And we do see some semi-discrete elements here, but not quite as many open warm sector supercells as what the ARW showed. More of a messy, linear, clustered mode for the most part before things really congeal into the evening hours tonight. So that's a little bit of a different solution than the ARW. ARW would be more of a ceiling case, I think, with this event, with multiple discrete supercells out in the open warm sector. The NSSL WRF and the HER much more on the what has been expected thus far with this event is more of a clustered linear mode with not a ton of open warm sector activity. We do have some warm sector activity out in here, but it is very messy, and that is kind of what has been expected so far with this event. But the ARW model, if that solution does come to fruition, that will be a very start to get very nervous with multiple supercells out here in the open warm sector, perhaps producing significant tornadoes. So that's going to do it for this video update. Once again, this is the current SPC outlook for today. Enhanced risk from basically the DFW Metroplex up toward Wichita Falls and over toward the northeast. Lawton, Oklahoma City, Tulsa, Fort Smith up to Springfield in that level 3 out of 5 enhanced risk in the orange shaded region here. Again, for western portions of this risk area, storms are going to perhaps initiate near here and then quickly move off to the east and northeast. So the severe threat for western portions of the risk area, including the OKC Metroplex, will be early on in the event. So closer to lunchtime, early afternoon, before things move off to the east, and we'll be done with this severe threat in the OKC metro area. Places like Dallas, Fort Worth, and up toward the northeast, over toward the I-40 corridor out in eastern Oklahoma, Fort Smith, Tulsa, Springfield, Joplin, you are under the gun for the afternoon hours as the bulk of the convection gets going, as storms move over into this area of eastern Oklahoma, western Arkansas, northeast Texas, southwest Missouri. They will encounter very strong low-level shear and adequate instability to support robust updrafts. So depending on storm mode, we will see a threat for all severe hazards. If we see some more isolated convection here, which is what the WRF ARW model showed, we could see, out in the open warm sector, we could see a slightly greater threat for a significant tornado or two over here, given a more discrete storm mode. But if storms get a little bit more messy, which is certainly possible given some of those factors we discussed in this video, then we might see more of a damaging wind and embedded tornado risk. Still, some of those embedded tornadoes could be strong, given the strong low-level shear in play, but it would be more of a damaging wind and embedded tornado risk there. But folks in these regions here today need to be on alert for all severe hazards. have multiple sources, multiple ways to receive warnings, have a plan in place if you have a warning issued for your area, and we'll get through this event just fine, and then we'll be off a little bit. We'll be able to take a breather after today for a little bit regarding severe weather. So that's going to do it. Stay safe out there today, and we'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.